Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, Tulsa's source for great gardens, southwoodgardencenter.com, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's show, host Casey Hinches is harvesting the blooming onions in our keyhole garden. We traveled to Mustang, Oklahoma to hear about the history of strawberry production in Oklahoma and visit with one of the growers who are helping OK Strawberries make a comeback. Extension Assistant Jen Olson identifies an unusual organism popping up in the landscape. And Barbara Brown prepares a roasted potato and cucumber salad.
Every spring it seems like we talk about having an abnormal spring, and here in Oklahoma again it's no different. Our onions were actually starting to bloom already, and we noticed this last week. Now, being in a public garden situation, sometimes the public might take the liberties of doing a little pruning for you, and in this case they actually have taken off all of our flower buds. But I wanted to go ahead and talk to you guys about what to do in that situation in case your onions are blooming as well. Onions are biennials, so typically they won't be blooming this first year. They need 2 seasons to complete that life cycle. Now, usually the reason why they do start blooming is because of the weather. So if you remember, we had some really warm days early on in the spring, and then it's been more recently followed by some cold, rainy days. This has actually kind of mimicked winter and tricked our plants into thinking they're in their second season, and so they've started blooming. You can see there's one that got left here. And so at this point, we've got a flower here, and we need to harvest these plants for 2 reasons. This flower stem is actually going to go down into the onion and divide our bulb. You can see here, this was the flower stem, and how large it is. It's really quite thick. You can see how thick it is and dense. Now, that's actually splitting our bulb, and we're after the bulb, not the flower. So you can see how it's deteriorated the quality of that bulb. So as soon as we see any flowers, we want to harvest this. The other thing is that when plants start to flower, they take energy out of the bulb. So again, that's going to reduce the quality of our bulb. So we've got pretty good sized bulbs here. We're going to go ahead and harvest these. And when you're harvesting, you just kind of want to get a trowel or something and get underneath there. Not to disturb the bulb, but try to give it a good tug. We're just going to shake that soil off. You don't want to wash these or anything at the time you're harvesting. I'm just going to shake them off like that and go ahead and put them on a tray. I love using these black web trays that you get plants in and stuff because they allow for good airflow. You want to harvest these and put them on something that allows for good airflow and place them in a location that's shady, not in direct bright light, but a shady location that has little humidity. If you know we're going to get rain or you get dew in that morning, you might want to bring those in so that they do dry out. This will continue to dry for a couple of days to a week, and when they do, we'll go ahead and trim off this top part and then just store those onions. You can trim the roots too. Store those onions in a mesh bag. Now, we do want to make sure to use any of those onions that had flowers as soon as possible. It's best to use them fresh or as soon as possible. Also, sweet onions tend to not store as well as your more pungent onions. So again, use your sweet onions before your strong onions. Now, over here on garlic, again, we had some flowers that have been trimmed again by the public or someone. And with onions, it's a little bit different because onions create a cloves around that stem. So we're not so worried about that flower stalk dividing our bulb. So in this situation, all we would do is remove that flower. It's been done for us. At this point, we will start to wait, and you can see the plants are starting to turn yellow. The plant's going through its natural senescence and dying back. After it's died about halfway, we're then going to harvest them and dry them out the same way we've done the onions. Joining us today is Steve Upson, who is a horticulture consultant at the Noble Foundation in Ardmore. And Steve, we're here at Rejoice Farms looking at some of their strawberries. It's berry season, right?
It is.
And the strawberries have kind of cycled through Oklahoma's history a little bit. Can you tell us about that?
Around the turn of the century, most of the berries were grown in Arkansas. This is before statehood. And so there really was a hot spot of production in northwest Arkansas. And then eventually all that production moved into Oklahoma Territory, or to the state of Oklahoma. And as the population grew, as Oklahoma grew, more berries were produced. Now at the time, most of the berries that were grown were either consumed on the farm or sold locally.
Okay.
Production kept increasing from around the turn of the century up to around 1930, according to the statistics I've looked at. And at that time, there were approximately 4,000 acres of strawberries grown in Oklahoma, and that's just hard for us to, wrap our minds around. It's a lot of berries, and those were grown on almost as many farms. I mean, I think around 3,900 farms. So the average farm size for berries was a little over an acre. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot of picking. That's a lot of berries.
Right.
But then things started to change. Several reasons for that. Production started to drop off. Demographics changed. California became a major producer. They had favorable climate, a lot of labor.
Transportation got better.
Transportation better. After the Second World War, we had the interstate system. And so you could deliver berries from California all the way to the central part of the United States, kind of overnight. And that had a competitive advantage there. And so production kept dropping, and by the 70s, there's hardly anything in Oklahoma. There were a few small plots, and of course people grew them in their backyards. But then over the last 10, 15 years, maybe 20, we've seen an uptick in that. And that is a result of people wanting local food. It's interesting how things cycle.
Yeah.
Eating properly, food security, that's a big thing, So all these factors kind of came into play to create this demand. And so we're seeing more of these types of small local production units coming into play here.
And what's great about this is you can actually speak to the farmer usually about how your berries have been treated, if you have questions about that. And in some cases they're you pick. So you can't get any fresher than that.
Right, yeah. And we've got berries that are grown traditionally with synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and then we have those that use a combination of organic and traditional, and then truly organic, and you're going to pay a little more for the organic. It takes a little bit more skill to grow things, organically. Fortunately, we have more products available now than we did even 10 years ago for the organic grower to use that can make, production less risky.
And so the farms that we're talking about, this is not just backyard gardening. This is for growing for farmers markets or you pick sort of agritourism type farms. What would you say the average size of those are? Are they still around 1 acre or?
Maybe less. Yeah, it's kind of like this. An acre to 2 would be really big in Oklahoma. Typically, the backyard production is going to be more traditional, matted row. This is plasticulture. Very, very intensive, a little more expensive, but the upside is that you have cleaner berries. You have a little more production compared to the old matted row system.
And what about our Oklahoma climate? I mean, is there a certain area that's better suited for strawberry production? Would you say central to eastern Oklahoma, or?
Well,
how far west can we go?
Okay, I mean, if you want to employ technology, you can go as far west as you want. But if you give them a little protection, they'll do fine anywhere. We find that that plants that are grown on these beds covered with plastic have less incidence of disease, of weeds, and they're a little easier to harvest. And of course, you can also grow them inside a greenhouse, which is kind of overkill. Many people are doing tunnels, or high tunnels, or we call hoop houses in Oklahoma. They're just a non-heated greenhouse. And that will send them to another level also in production. If people want to grow in a hoop house, grow strawberries in a hoop house, today I would recommend that they grow in a container where they can move that in or out of the tunnel, or have a movable tunnel.
Because that's expensive real estate.
It's very expensive real estate, yeah.
So if somebody is interested in growing for markets specifically, where could they contact the Noble Foundation for more information?
You bet.
All right. And your website would be the best way to get the information?
You bet, that would be. I'd be more than happy to talk with anybody on that on a commercial scale basis.
Excellent. Joining us is Harry Deupree, and we are here at Rejoice Farm in Mustang, Oklahoma. And Harry, we're amongst your strawberries here. Why did you start growing strawberries? You have several different crops you're growing, but...
I grew a few before, but not on this scale. And I'd been involved with the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture on some other programs, and I got a call one day, would you be interested in doing some research for us on strawberries to try to pick varieties that will really work well, especially in, say, central Oklahoma. And I was pretty good on keeping records, and I think that had something to do with it. But the opportunity to get into it a little bit more really fascinated me.
So what we're looking at is actually a trial with the Department of Ag.
It is.
What is it that they're trialing exactly?
Well, they want to see what varieties will best grow in various parts of the state. There's a couple of us in this general area, and so we're trying 5 different varieties here. Steve Upson from the Noble Foundation was the one that came up with the varieties, and I think all of them are good. I'll be eventually asked what my favorite is, but it'll be based on the various aspects that I see, the taste and the growth and the yield and so forth. But I get asked often, what's your favorite? And I just say, well, I've got 4 boys and I love them all equally and a lot. And I just love all these varieties.
So they're all turning out pretty well.
They have. They're kind of fickle in certain weather conditions. Right now, mine, well, we picked them pretty well lately, and I think they're going to make a comeback. But we still have good blossoms, so that speaks well for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
So what are some of the challenges with growing a strawberry crop?
Well, weather is certainly one of them, but growing them under plastic like this, that eliminates some of the problems of overwatering, and you can ensure that you get enough water.
Because there's drip irrigation underneath
drip
that
irrigation
plastic.
Every 12 inches. And I can also fertilize them that way. So we're watching those things real closely and soil test. And it's a good program. And the ones involved, I think, are really doing their very best to see that we get ultimate yields and accumulate good information.
And some of them produce at different times
They do,
bit, right?
Yes. Sweet Charlie is a very good one. It was our really first big producer, but now it seems like the Chandler is really producing in the festival. And the Camino Real, it's... I don't know if its days are numbered or what, but it's on the lower end right now, but it had some good weeks.
So Harry, how do you distribute your produce here? Are you a U-pick or?
Mainly U-pick at this point. I do sell on the Oklahoma City OSU Farmers Market, but so far the U-pick has kept us pretty well picked down, so I haven't utilized the Oklahoma City market yet.
So if somebody wants to come get some of Rejoice Farms produce, what's the best way to find out what's available?
Usually just to give me a call.
Okay, all right. Well, it's a great place to come visit, and I know if you don't mind, I'm going to help you pick some of these.
I hope you will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm here today not to talk about a plant disease problem, but to talk about something else that we often have submitted to the Plant Disease and Insect Diagnostic Lab in the spring. And so what we're talking about are slime molds. Often we get images sent in from county extension offices where people want to know, what is this in my yard? And sometimes we'll actually see slime molds climbing up plants or around the base of a tree. So generally where you find these slime molds is on any type of decaying plant material. So in the case of where I'm standing now, we have a slime mold that's growing on this mulch. Sometimes we might see it growing on turf grass where there's some dead material, dead leaves is where it gets its start, or just any kind of compost, organic material, or even hay bales if you have plants growing in hay bales. Most of the slime molds that we have are these plasmodial slime molds, and they look like these big blobby structures. We used to think these were fungi, and they actually are not fungi. They've been reclassified in the kingdom Protista, and slime molds normally grow as individuals, and they're sort of amoeba-like. They just kind of squish along and they can move. When they are by themselves, they are generally feeding on just decaying plant material. They can eat bacteria or fungi or yeast. And in the spring, when we start to have moisture and then warm, hot days, it's stressful. So when they go under stress, they send out a distress call to the other slime molds in the area. Hey, let's get together. And they form these aggregates. And they actually fuse and sort of work as one organism. And what they are doing is that they're going to produce spores. So they get together and they fuse and they start to make these spore structures. And as the slime mold dries out, the spores are going to blow off to other types of organic matter and start new of these blobby plasmodial structures. So what do we do about slime molds? They're not a disease, they're not a pathogen, and they're not hurting any plants, even if you see them growing on the surface. They're just, or climbing up, they're just trying to get height so their spores can blow further distances and they can spread further. So what you can do about it if you don't like them is just scoop them up and throw them away. Generally, when we get into a dry weather period, they just dry up and they kind of fade away. If it's on your turf grass, sometimes the slime molds will climb up the blades of the grass, and the grass might look a little bit yellow. It's not hurting the plant, it's just obscuring light, so they get a little bit yellow. If you don't like that, you could mow it and bag up those clippings and throw them away. You can also try to dislodge them with a strong spray of the hose, especially if we see it on turf or even on those straw hay bales. Gardens, pick it off around the plants and try to dislodge it with a strong spray of the hose. So slime molds aren't a problem for your plants. They're just an oddity that we see in the spring with all the moisture. And so if you don't like them, just wait and they're going to go away on their own.
Today we're doing roasted potato and cucumber salad. It's really fairly easy, but it's got a lot of ingredients to prep, but you can do a lot of it ahead of time. So I've got new potatoes or small red potatoes, whichever one you have. If you don't have small red potatoes, you can get some larger ones. What you basically want to do is cut them into kind of bite-sized pieces. To that I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil, half a teaspoon of kosher salt, half a teaspoon of black pepper, and then we're just going to mix these together. Now, if you are good at stirring things together, you can actually do this on a baking sheet. Have a rimmed baking sheet ready. I'm not good at stirring things together on a rimmed baking sheet, so I'm doing it in a bowl. Once you get them evenly coated and get the salt and pepper well distributed, you should have an oven preheating to 425 degrees. You're going to spread these out onto the baking sheet, and they're going to go into the oven for about 30 minutes until they start to, until they're tender when you pierce them with a knife. Spread those out a little bit into the oven. When the potatoes are tender enough that you can pierce them with a knife, they're ready to go. I'm just going to set these aside and let them cool a little bit while I make the dressing for this. They don't have to cool completely, so you probably don't want to do them that far ahead because they'll absorb more of the dressing when they're a little bit warmer. So I've got a third of a cup of mayonnaise, and to that I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, 2 teaspoons of sugar, again to cut that acid just a little bit. I'm going to whisk them together as I go just a tad. Also going to add a teaspoon of celery seed, a clove of garlic, and then see if I can get this out without losing my whisk. I've got a teaspoon of Dijon mustard that's going to go in there and share the bowl with everything else. I'm going to whisk these together. And while we're whisking it together, I'm going to also try to whisk in, and you may just be able to do this in a little bit and then stir it the rest of the way. But I'm going to stir in 1/4 of a cup of olive oil, or whisk it in. Now there's a lot of ingredients here that are going to help this olive oil blend in. One is the mayonnaise itself, which is going to have egg yolk in it, which is going to help emulsify this. We also have that little bit of mustard that's going to help emulsify it. So this one's going to go in fairly easily as opposed to sometimes, and be stable as opposed to a regular type of oil and vinegar dressing. I'm doing this in this bowl because this is where we're going to mix everything together. So I'm attempting to try and reduce the number of bowls I use. This is the same bowl that I mix the oil together on the potatoes too. So we're saving a little bit of vegetable that way. All right, next thing I'm going to stir in, I've got a teaspoon of finely chopped oregano. This is fresh oregano, and an equal amount of fresh parsley, again minced, and a little bit of crushed red pepper. That's 1/8 of a teaspoon. Again, this is something that you might want to start small, and then if you decide it needs a little bit more of a boost, you could always add in a little bit more. Now, while this continues to cool just a little bit, I'm going to show you the difference between here. This is the English cucumber that we're going to use in this recipe. You can see that the seeds are much finer, particularly as cucumbers ripen, their traditional ones, which are this one. Those seeds can get really large and prominent, so that if you don't want to invest in that English cucumber, which are usually a little bit more expensive, they're also substantially longer. So I'm using about 3/4 of one of those. You could use one of the regular ones. Just make sure that it's young. You might need to use 2. It's a salad, so you can kind of play with those ratios as you see how it's going together. All right, I think we'll go ahead and add our potatoes to this. We want to go ahead and get those in there and let them start to get them a little bit coated with the dressing. I'll get my whisk out of the way. I don't think we're going to be really needing it anymore. You shouldn't have to put any oil on the pan, as you can see I'm having trouble getting some of these potatoes off, because we coated them with oil to start with. So we're going to stir these together a bit just to get that dressing over them. As I said, this is going to be better absorbed while it's a little bit warm. Now, if you had a little bit more time, I would probably give it a little bit more time for this to cool down a bit more. I'm going to go ahead and add the other ingredients. The reason I let it cool a little bit more is because I don't want to cook these other ingredients. So you can see this one's still steaming, and which is probably a little bit too hot. So I've got a 1/2 cup of red onion that I've sliced fairly thinly. And then my English cucumber that I've sliced thinly as well. Now the trick with cucumber, no matter which kind you have, is that it tends to adhere to itself. So try and separate the slices a little bit. It's not a crime if they go in there and they're stuck together, but it's nicer if you can get them separated so they can each get coated. And the last ingredient I'm going to add is a 1/2 cup of chopped fresh parsley. Remember, we had a little bit of parsley in the dressing. Here's a little bit more. Stir those together, and then this is ready to eat. So we'll get out a nice plate. I'll stir it just a tad more. But this is roasted potato and cucumber salad. The recipe actually is fairly large. It will serve 10 people, so you can always cut it in half or this one makes a great one for a party. I hope you'll try it. Again, it's roasted potato and cucumber salad. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. Next week, we look at a beautiful blooming tree. Casey divides water lilies from the water garden. And we visit a grower in Mustang, Oklahoma, who is using hoop houses to get a jump on his tomato crop. So be sure and join us then for more TV You'll Grow to Love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society. We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.